They told me the world collapses in silence, and I found out it's true. Mine didn't fall with screams or explosions. It fell with the muffled sound of a door being locked from the outside, with the metallic click of handcuffs that didn't match my expensive dress, with the cold eyes of journalists who once called me America's princess, and now reveled in calling me a defendant. I grew up amid spotlights, speeches, and gala dinners. Since I was 12, I learned to smile with my eyes even when my stomach churned, to cross my legs at the right angle to seem respectable, to never say more than necessary. Because, after all, I was the senator's daughter, the perfect princess of the American elite. But all that turned to dust in a matter of minutes. A denunciation, an accusation without proof, a scandal that needed a face to quell public outrage, and the face chosen was mine. In the police car, with the sirens silenced but the lights still, reflecting on my trembling knees, I stared at my reflection in the window and didn't recognize that woman. I wanted to scream that I was innocent, that there was a mistake, that someone needed to listen. But no one listens to a princess when she becomes a headline. I was thrown into a world where my name meant nothing, or worse, it meant contempt. On the first day, no one looked me in the eye. The guards just repeated procedures. The inmates watched me as if I were a misplaced mirage, something out of place. And I was. With my navy blazer still pressed, my posture still upright, my fears all trying to seem dignified. I spent the night, awake, not out of fear of the cell or the concrete, but because of what I felt when I realized I was no longer anyone's daughter. I was just a number, and even that didn't make me special there. I tried to keep my composure in the first few days. I tried to eat, speak little, obey, but there was something crueler than the environment itself. Oblivion, the calls that went, unreturned. The lawyers who said, "We'll see what can be done," when before they'd said, "Leave it all to us." My family vanished from my life like a failed project quietly abandoned. And for the first time, everything I was ceased to matter. I was stripped of privileges, exposed in a way I never imagined. It was in that void that I began to see him. At first, just a shadow among the silhouettes in the cafeteria, among the library chairs, among the gazes that avoided me. But he didn't look away. He looked as if he saw beyond the beige uniform and the tied-up hair, as if he knew what it was to lose everything and still stand tall. And in that look, silent and steady, I felt, I didn't yet understand, but I felt that the story they were writing about me was about to change. In the first few days, I tried not to look at anyone for too long. Here, holding a gaze, is almost an invitation, and I was still learning the rules of that parallel universe where social laws meant nothing. The way you walk, where you sit, the tone you use to answer the guards, everything carries a consequence. And perhaps by instinct, or because I'd spent my life reading people to survive power games, I quickly learned to become invisible. But he saw me. He always saw me. He sat in the same corner of the library, a book in his hands, and an expression that seemed carved in marble. He never smiled, never spoke. But his eyes spoke for him. Elijah was an enigma no one dared to unravel. The older inmates whispered his name with a certain dark respect, as if there were a line even the toughest wouldn't cross. He walked alone, with the authority of someone who didn't ask for permission. And for some reason I couldn't understand, he always rested his gaze on me. At first I thought it was disdain. Like so many there, he might think I was just another spoiled rich girl crying over her fall from grace. But that look was different. It didn't diminish me. It studied me. It analyzed me as if trying to figure out where I'd stop belonging. And maybe that's why over time I started seeking him out, pretending to flip through books I knew by heart, walking through corridors at odd hours. I didn't know what I expected to find, I just knew that being near him gave me an uncomfortable and strangely comforting feeling. The first real contact happened on a cloudy afternoon when I tripped in the yard and scraped my knee against the concrete. No one approached, not out of malice, but because in that place, fragility is poison. But he came, without haste, without announcement. He knelt before me with a handkerchief I don't know where he got and pressed it against the wound. I couldn't speak. I was paralyzed, not by the pain, but by the closeness. By the way he did it without looking at the others, without caring what they'd say. When he finished, he handed me the folded handkerchief and said for the first time, in a low, deep, steady voice, "They want you to break, but you won't." And then he stood up and walked away. Just like that. But after that, everything changed. The prison remained the same. The walls didn't get less cold. The days didn't get less long. But I was different, because now there was someone there who didn't see me as a symbol, a fraud, or a victim. He saw me, and the idea of being seen after being forgotten by everyone who called me daughter, hope, future, made me breathe again. After that day, something opened inside me. Slowly, like a door creaking after years of being locked. We didn't exchange many words. In fact, days passed without him, even looking at me again. But it was enough to know he was there, that there was someone who saw me bleed and didn't walk away. In the world outside, people approached me out of interest, convenience, image. In that place, where there was nothing to offer, no appearance to maintain, he approached out of humanity. And that, to me, was a gesture of indescribable magnitude. I started watching him more, not with curiosity, but with reverence. There was something about Elijah that couldn't be explained with words. He was the kind of man who carried stories on his shoulders, but didn't let them bend him. His silence wasn't empty. It was full. And every time our paths crossed, even for seconds, I felt something in me taking shape again. I knew I was changing, because I began to let go of what had once been my armor. The faded makeup, the loose hair, the chipped nails, all that once scared me now felt liberating. For the first time, I didn't need to be beautiful, perfect, or unshakable. I just needed to be. I started writing in the old notebook a cellmate gave me. I wrote what I felt, what I remembered, what hurt. And often, without meaning to, I wrote about him, about the way he listened when no one spoke, about how his silence shouted louder than most words. He was everything the world had denied. Me, strength without oppression, presence without demand, truth without pretense. In the rare moments we exchanged sentences, they were always direct, curious, almost emotionless on the surface, but heavy with meaning. I learned he read books about justice, that he understood poetry, that he didn't, like loud music. I learned he had an old scar on his collarbone, and that behind his hardened gaze there was a guarded pain no one dared touch. And even without him saying it, I felt that there was something in me that moved him too. Maybe because he saw in my gaze what existed in his. Loss, yes, but also survival. In that cell where time seemed to drip slowly down the walls, I began to remember who I was before being what others expected. And it was there, between bars and solitude, that I understood one of life's cruelest and most liberating truths. Sometimes you have to lose everything to find someone, and yourself. And even without touch, without promises, without any certainty, I knew that between us something was being built, something that no bars, no rumors, no time could undo. There was never an exact moment, no cinematic turning point, no stolen kiss behind a pillow, or whispered declaration under the moonlight. What happened between Elijah and me was slow, almost imperceptible. like the change of seasons you only notice when the leaves start to fall. Little by little, he began to sit closer in the library, not looking directly, but close enough for me to feel his warmth. And even in silence, his presence said everything. I'm here. A mute phrase that sustained me more than any speech I'd received outside. Sometimes he left short notes between the pages of books. Sentences scratched, in firm handwriting like, "You're stronger than you think," or "Don't let them decide who you'll be." I pretended not to see, but I memorized every word. I started doing the same. I drew small symbols in the corners of pages. I wrote stray words only he would understand. It was our code, our secret territory, in a place where everything was watched. We never talked about what it meant, but we knew. Something was blooming there, something that needed no definitions. The other inmates began to notice, not with anger, but with that look between curiosity and respect. No one got too close. There was an invisible space around Elijah that everyone honored. But somehow, as I grew closer to him, part of that space extended to me, not as protection, but as recognition, the fallen princess who hadn't truly fallen, and he, the man everyone feared, but who was now seen differently, because of me, because of us. It was one late afternoon when he finally spoke more than a sentence. We were near the inner fence, where we could sometimes linger during free hours. Hitadiu approached slowly, hands in his pockets, and said, without looking directly at me, "You know this isn't normal, right?" I turned to him, pretending not to understand. "This what?" "This, us. This thing that has no name." I smiled without smiling. "Maybe it doesn't need a name." He looked at me for the first time in days, truly, and his eyes were heavy with something that hurt and healed at the same time. "But it needs courage." "I'm scared, Elijah." "So am I," he replied. "But still, I keep coming." After that, the days took on a different tone. We didn't talk about love, because love was a luxury not spoken aloud. But it was there, in the way he waited for me, in the way I always left the chair beside me empty. It was in the care with which he steered small dangers from my path without anyone noticing. It was in the way I watched his shoulders, looking for signs of fatigue no one else saw. In prison, loving isn't a gesture. It's resistance. It's trusting a glance when everything else lies. And between bars and harsh routines, I discovered that loving could be silent, clandestine, and still profound, and truer than anything I'd lived under the spotlights of my old life. It wasn't surprising when the tension began to build around us, as if that silent feeling, until then just ours, started to disturb the world. Elijah always knew where. He stepped. Unlike me, he understood the invisible boundaries of the prison, the unwritten rules that could destroy you if you broke them. And by getting close to me, he disrupted that balance. There were longer than normal glances from the guards, muffled murmurs among inmates who had previously ignored me, and even without declarations, even without touch, what was growing between us was already strong enough to unsettle. I began to feel the weight of choices. On one side, the woman who'd learned to survive in silence, used to obeying. On the other, the one who now felt something real and fierce that made me face what had once paralyzed me. And the closer I got to Elijah, the further I moved from the old version of myself, the one who sought approval, avoided conflict, always followed the script. But loving someone like him in that place was a risk. And I knew it. I'd known it from the start. I just didn't know I'd be tested so soon. It happened on a night without warning, as everything there did. A commotion among inmates, a miscalculated shove, a fight that started far away but ended too close. I saw Elijah step between me and another inmate who'd lost control. It all happened in seconds, but what stayed was the image. Him being restrained, handcuffed, thrown to the ground by 2 guards who arrived late, as they always did when it suited them. They yelled at me to back off, said I was involved. And for the first time since I'd arrived, I felt a fear that wasn't for me. It was for him. After that, he disappeared. Solitary. Punishment. The name they used didn't matter. It was retribution. And not just for the commotion, but for what he represented now. For daring to get close to me. For the story they wanted to control. I tried to find out about him through the means I had, but the walls grew higher. Silence was imposed, and there, in the midst of that forced absence, I understood with brutal clarity how much he'd already become part of me. That week, for the first time, I thought about giving in, about pulling away, about protecting what was left of my integrity, but all it took was remembering the way he looked at me. Not as a senator's daughter, not as a fallen symbol, but as a woman. All it took was that to know. I couldn't bear to pretend nothing had happened, because it had. It has. Even in silence, even behind locked doors, even in pain. So I wrote. I wrote to the administration. I wrote to my lawyers. I wrote to the press that had once crucified me. I wrote not as Nathalli, the scandal's princess, but as someone who, for the first time, chose not to stay silent. I didn't say I loved him. They wouldn't understand. But I said there was an injustice. And with that, I did what I never thought I was capable of. I began to fight for someone who gave me back to myself. The decision to expose myself again didn't come with relief. It came with pain. A different pain from the one I felt when I was first handcuffed or when I saw my name plastered across headlines as the villain of a story I didn't write. It was the pain of someone who decides not to run anymore, who chooses to stay, even knowing how much it might hurt. I knew that my words, now handwritten on rough paper and forced through bureaucratic channels, might change nothing. But they were mine, for the first time mine. And the truth, when it comes from the gut, even if ignored, has the power to shake the world. It took a few days, long enough for me to start doubting again, as I had so many times before. But then, on a morning of white sky and dry air, they called me for a meeting with the administration. Their posture was cold, their words chosen with tweezers. They said my complaint was being reviewed, that the facts were being re-examined. But what I saw in the eyes of the man before me was something else. Discomfort. Because someone like me, someone who was supposed to be broken, was there, whole, speaking with conviction, using the power they thought they'd stripped from me. Elijah was taken out of solitary 3 days later. He returned thinner, his eyes deeper, but with the same presence he'd always carried. He didn't smile when he saw me, and I didn't expect him to. But there was something in the way he approached, the way he lightly touched my shoulder with his fingers, the way he looked at me in silence. There was something no punishment could erase. The connection was intact, or rather stronger, because now it was sealed with resistance. That night, we sat in the library, as we had so many times before. We didn't talk about what happened. We didn't need to. He just whispered as if saying a prayer. They didn't know who they were messing with. And then for the first time, I let my head rest on his shoulder. Not as an escape, but as a choice. And there, in the middle of the watched darkness, I realized that everything they'd taken from me, my name, my freedom, my reputation, couldn't compare to what I'd found. Because loving in a prison is an act of war. And I was ready to keep fighting. The repercussions began as a whisper. A small, almost irrelevant blog published a discreet note about the daughter of a former senator denouncing abuses within the prison system. But that was enough to reignite a spark. A name like mine caught up in scandal again. only this time not as the guilty party, but as someone who fought back. Within days, larger outlets began chasing the story. The system wasn't prepared, because it never is when those they think are destroyed rise up with their own voice. There were denied interviews, closed doors, formal refusals. But outside, younger, more indignant journalists began to dig. And when they found inconsistencies in the case, hidden files, testimonies that were never taken seriously, the narrative began to crumble. Not explosively, but like a wall that had long been cracked and was now giving way under the weight of truth. For the first time, the country turned its eyes to me, not as a symbol of shame, but as a woman who resisted, and even with the world stirring outside, I was still inside. But something had changed. The gazes that once judged me now hesitated. The guards called me by my name. The inmates, once distant, approached with subtle gestures of respect. And Elijah walked beside me as if he'd known from the start that this day would come. He was never impressed by my courage, because he always saw in me something I still couldn't see myself. It didn't take long for my case to be reopened. The new defense team, now made up of people who truly believed in me, began gathering evidence, names, documents. It was a slow process, painful, but this time I wasn't alone. With every step forward, I told Elijah, not out of vanity, but because he was part of it. He was the reason I hadn't given up. And every time I returned from the hearing room with burning eyes and a tired body, it was in his eyes that I found myself again, until one day they simply called my name. No ceremony, no announcement. They just said my release had been signed. The evidence of my innocence had finally been accepted. My time there was over. I should have felt euphoric. I should have cried with relief, shouted, given thanks, but all I felt was a dull emptiness, because part of me, perhaps the truest part, had been shaped within those walls, and the man I loved would stay behind. At the farewell, there was no scene. Just a steady look, a quick touch of hands, and the phrase I'll never forget. Now you live for both of us, but not for long. I'll get out too. And I believed him. Because when a man looks into your eyes and gives you back your life, no walls can hold him forever. Outside, the light felt harsher, the air lighter. But I couldn't breathe right, not on the first day, not after everything. The gate closed behind me with a sound that should have meant freedom. But all I felt was absence. His absence. The absence of what had become the only place where I was wholly myself, a cruel paradox. I, the woman raised to shine before cameras, now felt out of place in a world I once called mine. Because here, everything was movement, rush, surface, and after living where time was static and every second hurt, nothing felt more false than this hurried pace of people who feel nothing deeply. The press was waiting, but this time I didn't hide. I spoke, without tears, without scandal. I spoke with the same conviction Elijah had when whispering advice between concrete walls. I told them what they did to me. I told them what I saw. I told them that love can be born in places no one dares imagine, and that it was this love that saved me. Not the system, not the names, not the cold truths of documents, but the look of a man who, even imprisoned, taught me what it was to be free. And maybe that's why the story touched so many people, because it was real. Because it had no neat ending, no makeup. In the months that followed, I rebuilt myself bit by bit, alone, without shields, without a surname, just me. I gave interviews, published letters, attended public hearings, denounced, embraced causes I'd once only pretended to support, and every step I took out here was also for him. I never said his name. It was our way of protecting what was ours alone. But in every word I spoke, he was there. in the subtext, in the tone, in the memory. And I knew. Somehow he knew it. 2. I kept writing. It was my way of resisting, of processing, of turning what still hurt into something that made sense. I created a project to give voice to invisible women, to bring stories no one wanted to hear out of the shadows. I spoke with other Nathallis, women who, like me, were silenced by a system that sees numbers, not people. And deep down, each one of them was a way of staying close to him. Because Elijah wasn't just the man I loved. He was the seed of everything I'd become. But every day, when I woke up, there was a part of me that kept waiting. Not like someone who waits sitting, still, but like someone who builds the ground so the other can find where to step when they arrive. Time passed the way it always does when you have hope, slowly, but with purpose. Every day, without Elijah, was a day lived with half a heart. But I kept going for both of us, because he asked me to, and because I knew, with a certainty that can't be explained, that he would come. Not with flowers, not with speeches, not with the haste of movie romances. Elijah wasn't a man of empty promises. He was a man of presence. And when he said he'd come, he would. The news came on an ordinary morning. An email from the public, defender who'd taken his case with my help. 3 words. Hearing favorable, release imminent. I read and reread it in silence, without shouting, without running, without breaking into tears. But inside me, something collapsed, and it was beautiful. It was the certainty that love, when it's real, survives everything. Abandonment, distance, time, bars. I waited a few more days without telling anyone. I kept it like a sacred secret, because that reunion, that moment, was ours alone. He was released on a gray afternoon, one of those when the world feels calmer, as if it knows something important is about to happen. I was there, standing, no makeup, no team, no press, just me, the woman who survived, who fought, who learned to breathe again. He walked out with the same steady stride as always, but now lighter, as if each step were an answer to the world that tried to erase him. Our eyes met, and for a moment, time truly stopped. I didn't run to him, and he didn't run to me. We walked toward each other slowly, like people honoring the path taken to get there. When we finally reached each other, he looked at me the way he did the first time, serious, silent, deep, and said only, "You waited for me." And I replied, my voice breaking but steady, "Because you were worth every second." He touched my face as if it were fragile, but I wasn't, not anymore. I was made of scars and courage. And when he hugged me, I knew this wasn't the end of anything. It was the beginning of a life where we wouldn't need to hide anymore, where our love would no longer be silence, but choice, where at last we could breathe the same air, under the same sky, without fear of being ourselves. Life didn't give us back what we lost, but it gave us something many will never have, a love that survived ruin, and the freedom to start again, together. Today, when I wake up beside him, I no longer think about the bars, or the cell, or the days of silence and pain. I only think about how far we've come, how much we've resisted. Our love was born in a place where everything falls apart, and still it rose, not with haste, not with promises, but with truth. Elijah makes coffee every morning like it's a ritual. He sets 2 cups on the table and waits for me to wake up with that smile that still disarms me. Sometimes we walk in silence, and that silence, once heavy, is now home, our home. The days are simple, and that's exactly where the beauty lies. No one watches us anymore. No one decides for us. We're not perfect. We have scars, traumas that still ache when the world touches where it shouldn't. But now we have each other, and that's enough. Because when you find someone who loves you at your worst, the love that grows from that needs no proof. It just is. And if today I could say something to that scared woman who first walked into that prison, it would be this. Don't be afraid to lose everything, if it means finding yourself. And in my case, it was there, between bars and truths, that I found myself and him.